The room smelled faintly of furniture polish and old paper, the kind of scent that clung to wealth passed down through generations. They were all there, cousins in polished shoes, uncles with stiff smiles, and her in-laws, dressed sharp, their laughter sharp enough to cut. When the lawyer slid the manila envelope across the mahogany table, everyone leaned in. The inheritance reading had begun. Names were called, bequests announced, a watch here, a parcel of land there. Each gift carried history, value, and weight. And then, her name. The lawyer cleared his throat. To Mrs. Althea Morrison, the 1992 Chevy Astro van. A beat of silence, then the in-laws chuckled, not cruelly, but in that quiet, knowing way that says, we expected nothing more for you. They didn't even try to hide their smirks. One of them whispered just loud enough. Guess she can drive herself to the thrift store now. That laughter, low, dismissive and almost pitying, lodged itself somewhere between her ribs. But Althea simply nodded, pressing the envelope to her lap. No one knew that she had driven that van years ago, during one of the darkest chapters of her life. No one knew the man who'd owned it had been her late father-in-law, a man with a talent for silence and secrets. No one knew that when she slid the key into the van's ignition, the next day, her fingers would brush against something taped beneath the steering column, something that would reveal that the old rusted shell was more valuable than the grandest home in the family's portfolio. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, sitting in a chair, holding back her dignity while others laughed, was the exact point where her life pivoted. Here sits what that moment teaches us. The world will often hand you something wrapped in disrespect, assuming you will only see its surface. The question is whether you have the patience to discover its depth. And as Althea would soon learn, a single action, quiet, deliberate, could flip the entire outcome. Althea Morrison had married into the family 15 years earlier, a family where wealth wasn't just about money, but about control. Her late husband Daniel had been the youngest son, brilliant but restless, while his siblings stayed close to the family's business empire, luxury real estate, law firms, and political connections. Daniel had chosen a different path. Teaching music at a public high school, fixing old cars in their driveway, and occasionally buying odd pieces from estate sales. To the rest of the family, that was a waste of potential, and marrying Althea, a woman from a working-class background, only deepened their silent judgment. There were dinners where conversations skipped over her, as though she were a guest at her own table. Holidays where she was given gifts that were almost pointed in their modesty, an oven mitt, a clearance sweater, while others unwrapped watches and designer coats. But Daniel had loved her with a fierce, uncomplicated devotion. He didn't care for the family's approval. What he did care about was keeping her safe from the games they played with money and inheritance. When Daniel passed suddenly from a heart attack, Althea's position in the family became fragile. She wasn't part of the business, she didn't have legal training, and she had no children to bind her permanently to the bloodline. The subtle sidelining became more pronounced. She'd hear about family events after they'd happened. Financial matters in which Daniel had once been transparent became foggy, handled internally, without her input. When the patriarch Daniel Sip's father fell ill, she visited him quietly, often outside visiting hours. They didn't speak much, but sometimes he asked her questions no one else in the family did. You still playing piano? Ever think about fixing up that old van? It seemed like small talk then, but looking back, those moments carried weight. Because beneath the polite exclusion, there was something deeper at work, a belief that value, financial, social, or emotional, could be controlled by gatekeepers, that those without power must simply accept the scraps they are handed. And Althea, patient as she was, understood something critical. Power isn't just taken, sometimes it's inherited in ways the powerful can't see coming. Which is why, when that manila envelope slid toward her with the words 1992, Chevy Astro van, she didn't flinch. She already knew the family's arrogance had a blind spot, and blind spots can hide more than weakness. She didn't know exactly what the old man had left her, but she knew enough to look closer. The day after the will reading, the van sat in the corner of the Morrison family garage lot, where unused vehicles were parked before being sold off for scrap. It looked worse than she remembered. The blue paint faded to gray, rust blooming along the wheel wells, one headlight dim and cloudy. A thin layer of dust dulled the windshield. She could hear her late husband's brother, Victor, speaking to one of the lot workers. Don't even bother fixing it, just tow it to the junkyard, might get a couple $100 for the scrap metal. Victor caught sight of her, smiled faintly and said, unless you really want it, Althea, no hard feelings either way. This was the fork in the road. On one side was the easy path, decline the van, avoid the hassle, and keep her dignity intact. No one would blame her. She could tell herself it was just a meaningless object, and walk away with her pride, if not her inheritance. On the other side was the uncertain path, take the van, invest time she didn't have, and money she couldn't spare to get it running again, dig into whatever reason, if any, her father-in-law had for leaving it to her. It would mean asking questions that might irritate the family. It would mean stepping into a space they assumed she didn't belong, the space where value is uncovered, not handed out. Her mind went back to a lesson she used to give her piano students. The wrong note isn't stake, the problem. The problem is when you stop playing. So she signed the transfer papers without hesitation. She even smiled as she took the single tarnished key from the lot worker's hand. Victor smirked, certain she had just accepted a burden she couldn't carry. But as she slid into the driver's seat, her fingers brushing the cracked vinyl steering wheel, something caught her attention, a faint unevenness under the dash. A ripple of curiosity passed through her. She didn't know it yet, but that one decision, to claim what looked worthless, was the first move in a game the rest of the family didn't even know they were playing. Althea didn't the store drive the van home that day. She drove it to the one place she trusted, a small repair shop tucked behind a row of warehouses on the edge of town. The owner, Reggie, was an old friend of Daniel's, a man with more tools than words, and a memory like a vault. When he saw the van rumbling up, his eyebrows lifted. "Haven't seen this thing in years," he said, running his hand along the side panel. "You know your father-in-law wouldn't let nobody else touch it but him." She handed him the keys. "I just need to know if it set's worth keeping." Reggie popped the hood. The engine was tired but intact. Then he ducked inside, running his flashlight over the interior. That's when he froze. "Althea, you see this?" He tapped the underside of the dashboard. A thin strip of black electrical tape had been folded neatly over something metallic. With careful hands, he peeled it back, revealing a small brass key, worn smooth by years of use. It was far too small to be for the van. Reggie glanced at her. "Looks like a safe deposit box key. First National Bank, if I still not mistaken." Althea's heart gave a slow, deliberate beat. Her father-in-law had never trusted digital records. If he had something important, something he didn't want the rest of the family to see, this was exactly how he would hide it. Here, 6 what that moment teaches us. Sometimes the real gift isn't the thing itself, it's the access it grants you. Althea felt a flicker of something she hadn't in months, not just curiosity, but leverage. The van wasn't a throwaway, it was a lock, and now, she held the first key. But she also knew this: if she went after what was in that box, she'd be stepping into a conflict the family would never forgive. 2 days later, Althea walked into First National Bank with the small brass key in her pocket. The marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the air smelled faintly of cold paper and polished metal. At the counter, she handed the key to the banker, a middle-aged woman, with a pleasant smile. "Safe deposit box, please." The banker tapped at her computer, her smile faltering. "Mrs. Morrison, I see the box is registered under your father-in-law Sep's name. You stir not listed as an authorized user." Althea leaned in. "He sits deceased. I have the key. Isn't there a process for this?" The woman's voice softened. "The way people speak to someone they've decided is powerless." "There is, but it requires a court order or explicit mention in the will. Without either, I'm afraid." A sharp voice interrupted from behind. "She sits not authorized." It was Victor. He stepped forward in a tailored suit, his expression smooth but cold. "Bank records are part of the estate. The executor, which is me, handles this." Althea Set's pulse quickened. "You've had months to handle it. Why leave it untouched?" Victor Set smiled in this reach his eyes. "Because there's nothing in it worth touching." The man kept old coins, broken watches. "But you sir, chasing shadows." The banker's gaze bounced nervously between them. Regulations gave her cover to side with Victor. Within minutes, the conversation ended, and Althea found herself walking back out into the sunlight, empty-handed, the key burning in her palm. On the drive home, the reality hit her. Victor wasn't just dismissing her, he was actively blocking her. She pulled into her driveway, and sat in the van for a long time, staring at the dashboard. For the first time since the reading of the will, doubt sank its teeth in. Maybe she had been foolish to think there was anything here worth fighting for. That night she opened her late husband's photo album, not to reminisce, but to look for something concrete, a date, a receipt, a clue. Instead, she found a handwritten note tucked between the pages. In her father-in-law Set's cramped script, it read, "The real gold is where the rust runs deepest." It wasn't Set just a metaphor. It was a map. Althea read the note again under the dim kitchen light. "The real gold is where the rust runs deepest." She turned it over in her hands, her mind running through possibilities. Her father-in-law had been many things: stubborn, private, fiercely independent, but above all he was deliberate. He didn't leave messages for sentiment, he left instructions. The van, the rust. It wasn't just a poetic jab at its condition. The next morning, she drove it back to Reggie's shop. This time she asked him to put it on the lift. The van groaned as it rose, revealing its corroded undercarriage. Reggie shined his flashlight along the frame rails, frowning. You see this? These panels aren't set original. Somebody welded extra plating under here. Althea crouched down. Beneath layers of oxidation, she could see faint seams. It took nearly an hour of careful grinding and unscrewing before a small rectangular metal box came loose, welded into the undercarriage itself. Reggie handed it to her, heavy, cold, the kind of weight that makes your fingers curl tighter. Back at her kitchen table, she pried it open with a flathead screwdriver. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were dozens of small gleaming ingots, gold, each stamped with a mint mark. Her breath caught. She counted quickly. Enough here, to change the course of her life entirely. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. Instead she sat very still, letting the reality settle. This was more than inheritance. This was intent. Her father-in-law had bypassed the will, bypassed the executor, bypassed the family politics, and given her something they couldn't legally touch, something they wouldn't even know existed, unless she told them. Here sits what that moment teaches us. Sometimes, the most strategic move isn't to confront your adversaries head-on, it's to operate in a space they can't see. But Althea also knew this. Holding gold and keeping gold were two very different battles. And the moment Victor suspected she had anything of value, the quiet war between them would go public. Althea didn't set rush to cash in the gold. Impulse was the enemy of strategy, and if she learned anything from her father-in-law, it was that wealth, without secrecy, is just bait for predators. She divided the ingots into 3 cloth bags and placed them in different safe deposit boxes. At 3 different banks, none of them First National. Each account was opened under a quiet trust she had set up with the help of a small independent attorney Reggie had recommended. The attorney, a sharp black woman named Mariah Ellis, didn't ask for the full story. She just looked at Althea and said, "You want to keep something safe from family? That sits not paperwork, that sits architecture." With Mariah's help, Althea began converting some of the gold into discrete investments, municipal bonds, a minority stake in a thriving logistics company, and an account that funneled funds into a small scholarship program for music students at her late husband's school. She didn't flaunt any of it. Her home looked the same. She still drove the van. She still shopped at the same grocery store. Meanwhile, the family carried on believing she had taken the van out of sentiment, assuming she was quietly struggling. What they did instead see. The deed she quietly acquired for a small commercial property they were eyeing for redevelopment. The lawyer she had on retainer, ready to counter any estate maneuver Victor might attempt. The growing network of allies, from the bank clerks to the notary, who now saw her as more than the widow on the edge of the family. Here sits what that moment teaches us. True power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's built in silence, one unremarkable move at a time, until it becomes undeniable. Althea was no longer reacting to the family's decisions. She was building a position they didn't even realize she had, and soon, that quiet climb would put her directly in their path, on her own terms. The Morrison family gathered in the downtown boardroom for a special meeting. Victor had called it, citing an urgent opportunity, the purchase of a prime block of commercial property the family's real estate arm had been chasing for years. When Althea entered, there were a few polite nods, the kind people give when they expect you to be an observer, not a participant. Victor stood at the head of the table, voice smooth and assured. "This property is the missing piece in our expansion plan. The seller has agreed to meet today to finalize the terms." The door opened, and the seller walked in, a middle-aged man in a crisp blue suit. But instead of shaking Victor's hand, he crossed the room and extended it to Althea. "Mrs. Morrison, good to finally meet in person." The room froze. Althea smiled faintly, her voice calm. "Likewise, I understand we shall be finalizing the transfer today." Victor Sett's brow furrowed. "Transfer to?" The seller placed a folder on the table and slid it toward Althea. Inside was the deed, already signed in her name. She didn't rush to explain. She let the silence do the work, watching realization dawn on their faces. Finally, she said, "While you were negotiating with the owner, I acquired the building next door, and then, I acquired this one from him directly. He preferred dealing with a single buyer, so now I own both." Victor's jaw tightened. The others shifted in their seats, processing the fact that the widow with the van had just taken a property that could alter the family's entire business plan. Althea leaned back in her chair. "It's funny. Sometimes what looks like rust is just gold with a little patience." Here steps what that moment teaches us. The best revenge isn't humiliation, it's undeniable competence. The meeting ended without another word to her. but the looks on their faces as they left told her the truth. The balance of power had shifted, and it wasn't going back. In the weeks after that boardroom meeting, the Morrison family moved with a new uneasy awareness around Althea. The holiday invitations came on time now. Her voice was suddenly valued in discussions, though she rarely spoke unless it mattered. Victor avoided direct confrontation, not out of respect, but because he finally understood she was playing a game he couldn't fully map. Behind the scenes, her moves continued. She renovated the commercial property, leasing space to black-owned businesses and startups that the family's portfolio had historically overlooked. Foot traffic in the area surged, and with it the value of the entire block, including the Morrisons' other holdings. They profited from her work without being able to claim credit. But Althea's victory wasn't just in real estate. The scholarship fund she'd quietly set up doubled in size, sending the first wave of music students to college. She started attending community development meetings, listening more than speaking, and making offers to buy properties in neighborhoods others had written off. One evening she visited Reggie's shop, the van still running in perfect condition. "You ever gonna tell them about the gold?" he asked. She shook her head. The gold was never the point. The point was proving I could build something they could take. Here sits what that moment teaches us. Redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about building something stronger in its place. The family might never embrace her fully, and that was fine, because she wasn't seeking their approval anymore, only the impact she could create with the resources they had tried to deny her. In their eyes, she was still the widow with the van. But in the eyes of the community, she had become something far more enduring. Years later, the 1992 Chevy Astro van still sat in Althea's driveway. The paint had been restored to a deep midnight blue, the rust gone, but she kept one small patch untouched, a reminder of where it all began. She never flaunted the gold, never told the full story. Those who knew her only saw the results: thriving businesses, scholarships changing lives, and a woman who moved through the world with quiet certainty. Occasionally someone from the family would make a passing comment. "You really did all right with what you had." She'd smile, knowing they still thought her success came from luck or timing. That was fine, because she understood the truth, and so did those who mattered. Her father-in-law's real gift hadn't been the gold at all. It had been a test. Would she see past insult to opportunity? Would she recognize that power can be built in the spaces where others see nothing? Here sits what her story teaches us. The world will sometimes hand you something that looks broken, useless, even insulting. Don't stop at the surface. The depth is where the transformation lives. Althea's legacy wasn't measured in carats or square footage, but in the lives she impacted, the systems she outmaneuvered, and the quiet way she proved that underestimation can be the sharpest tool in your arsenal. So here sits my challenge to you. Look at the rusted vans in your own life, the things others dismissed, the chances you almost overlooked, and ask yourself, what's hidden here that I haven't claimed yet? Because sometimes the single action of looking deeper is what flips the entire outcome. If this story resonated with your values, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe, not just to hear more stories like this, but to join a space where we honor resilience, strategy, and the brilliance that blooms under pressure.